17, 2015. Guess it started off like a typical work day for me. I made some coffee and packed lunch. My dog decided he wanted to stay inside, so I left him a big old bowl of food and water. And well, it's a good thing I did, because when I locked my gate behind me that morning, I guess there's no way of knowing it. It'd be 3 months before I'd be back there to open it, and I'd be a different man with a different life, and not in a good way. See, on that day, one thing was very different for me. I was working on somebody else's clock, and even though I didn't need the work because my own construction company had plenty of work, I took a short-term, part-time gig at a local, guess you'd call it a tourist trap / cesspool. Taking that job would turn out to be the worst decision of my life, and a decision I'll have to pay for the rest of my life. Good decision making is non-existent in this place, as you'll see. In the short time I'd worked there, I'd seen more safety violations than a lifetime in the construction industry. I had made numerous complaints about the ridiculously dangerous conditions, but all I could find were deaf ears. I was mortified by the conditions, but even more so by the indifference of the ownership and the management. But I was only days away from giving notice, and I just couldn't wait to walk away from that place. But walking away from that place was something I'd never get to do. There's no excuse for a business not to do everything in its power to protect the safety of its employees. I had employees that routinely worked in very dangerous conditions, and we never had a major accident, because you can work safely in dangerous conditions. And owners that knowingly endanger the safety of their employees or are indifferent to it are human garbage, and they don't deserve to be in business. On that day, my safety was in the hands of fucking morons. So I arrived that morning to a very unusual request. They needed help moving a gigantic fuel sign from its current location to a location about 100 yards away. It seemed the tight-ass owner of the place had rented a crane and decided on impulse that his employees, which consisted of gas station attendants and janitors, could move the sign more cheaply than the on-site construction company that had given a fair price to move the sign. But, I guess he wanted to show everybody. And he showed them all right. He showed everybody why fucking morons should never be in charge of moving gigantic fuel signs. Am I being too hard on these morons? No. The general manager of the place, the GM, showed up to supervise the operation. And I'd found out that the owner had been taunting this guy and telling him that he was going to promote me to be his boss, which is just a total mind, because I was a short timer and couldn't wait to get the fuck out of that place. But did that mind play a part in the events that are about to unfold? People with a pulse believe that it did. So I listened as the GM, with zero construction experience, laid out this just brilliant plan where he and I would stabilize the legs of the sign while the crane moved it to the new side. And a non-English speaking janitor with zero crane experience was designated to be the crane operator, of course. And this is a crane with tires as tall as a horse. Remember what I said about good decision making being non-existent in this place? It was then that I had the first full-blown premonition of my life. I was no longer concerned something bad was going to happen. I was convinced. This is already way outside the scope of what I'd signed on to do. Way different than patching up some floors and laying some linoleum squares. So while the geniuses loosened the sign from its base and attached the crane, I sought out another manager and informed him of the sheer stupidity that was unfolding outside. And the asinine plan that they were concocting. And I assured him that somebody could get killed, and his response wouldn't be the first time. So his solution was to go outside and oversee the operation personally. And man, ironically, this same manager, a few days before, I had taught him the procedure for knocking somebody off a live circuit should it ever become necessary. And unfortunately, this was information he chose to ignore when it became necessary. So they cranked up the extremely loud machine, and right away things began to go wrong. The plan was to take it down this stretch of paved road. But suddenly, without warning, the driver just turns and heads to the back of the parking lot. And he was driving way too fast. At this point, I'm confused because nothing's going according to plan. I mean, the plan that we just discussed moments before. And taking this route would mean we'd be leaving the pavement and cutting cross country in the mud. Certainly we weren't headed for the mud. Taking this route would be the very definition of stupidity, and surely the general manager wasn't stupid enough to try this. I tried to get the attention of the general manager, who was only maybe 8 foot away from me, but he just refused to look at me, and it just seemed completely unconcerned or unaware of the predicament we were about to be in. And sure enough, when we left that pavement, that sign began to thrash like a 10-ton bull from hell. And at a time when stabilizing that sign was job one, and the only job we were supposed to be doing, the GM lets go and just walks away. Just turns around and walks the fuck away. You only had one job to do. I was in disbelief at what I was seeing. He had led us directly into this predicament, and then, as if on cue, he just walks away the moment all hell breaks loose. Why the f didn't I just walk away? I've asked myself that 1,000,000,000,000 times. And then I saw a little bolt of electricity jump from the leg of that sign to the little finger on my left hand. And I knew what was happening. And although my focus had been squarely on the terrain, I formed a mental picture of the overhead power lines across this part of the lot. And I tried to yank my hands away immediately, but it was too late. Instead, I began to grab that sign with all my might. I could feel the full force of 50,000 volts as it began to electrify my body. And I'll never be able to forget the impact and the pain, the sound as it arced around my cranium and made my clenched teeth vibrate. It was horrific. And then it headed to my legs and burst out both feet into the mud that I was standing in. This isn't something I should have lived through. My surgeon suggested that maybe the water I was standing in kind of saved me because it allowed the electricity to ground out instead of coming back up through my body. So then every muscle in my body just began to contract violently, and I found myself drawn into kind of like a crouch ski racing type position. I was just completely awake and aware of the fact that I was trapped on an electrical circuit and was getting barbecued alive. It was a living nightmare. How in the hell did I get here? And then time just kind of came to a standstill. I felt more pain than I knew existed in the universe. Every atom and molecule and cell of me just pleaded with the universe to be turned loose from this living hell. And I just had too much time to think. I just began to think about my kids, my girls, and I just felt the sheer devastation of never being able to see them again or even have a proper goodbye. And I knew that really soon somebody was going to go tell them how I died in that way, and they'd never be the same. And I just couldn't do that to them. It just became my sole focus. Gave me the resolve to hang in there and fight against what was happening to me so I could see him again. Then my vision just seemed to turn into thousands of little pixels that just randomly started turning white until all I was left was that white light you hear about. But what I always had envisioned is like a stark quiet, like staring at a sheet of paper or something. This was organic, and it was more of a glow, and just felt like a living force. And at that moment, all the pain and the noise and the fear was just instantly replaced by peace and quiet and calm, and just no pain whatsoever. And I felt a total, complete trust in what was happening to me. I mean, I knew I was passing to the other side, but I wasn't the least bit hesitant to go. I mean, it was such a relief to be away from the pain. It was kind of a no-brainer. I just wanted to go with this new life force that had me in its grasp, that was taking me away from that other force. And I was still alive and conscious, and it was as real as anything that's happened to me. But I just felt my hands relax their grip, and my arms just fall limp to my side, and I felt my feet leave the ground, and I felt my body begin to be swept upward, and I could feel my stomach being taken away by the rapid rise, and I formed a mental picture of the whole scene below me, and I knew this was it. I mean, I was crossing over the other side, but I was just literally going with the flow. But suddenly this knowledge was just imparted, just instantly transplanted into my brain. It's not your time to go. I was just overcome with this joyous feeling, and I knew without a shred of a doubt I'd been spared. And it just stuck right there in the center of my soul. And just then my upward movement stopped, and I felt like inside of this glow was actually maybe many glowing life forces, and I really believe that maybe everyone that had ever cared about me in the past was there. And it was there where I felt like I was hundreds of feet above the earth, that I felt more acceptance and validation and love than maybe I'd ever felt on the earth there below me. But I knew I was going to get to see my girls, and I was just overfilled with happiness. And I really believe that the pure love I had for my girls just reflected as my being and my reason for being here, and I was just spared because of them. Then it began to drop away back to the earth, and I could feel the G-forces in my stomach, and my very human fear of falling started to fill my head. And I couldn't believe after all this I might end up in a crumpled heap in the mud. But then I just felt the gentlest touch of the earth underneath my boots, and at that exact same moment my hearing and my vision were restored, although what I was looking at would leave me in disbelief. You know, I was standing maybe 15, 20 feet away from the injury site, and there's a group of spectators, including the manager, that were just standing there with their mouths open and just spectating away, I guess. And I looked at my hands, and poor barbecued hands, both of them were just smoking, and my feet felt like they were melted. And at that point the pain came back, and I guess I went into shock and just collapsed in the mud. After an undetermined time I regained consciousness. I was lying in cold water and mud, and I was looking up at power lines against a backdrop of white clouds, and I guess it looked kind of peaceful, but I remember the first thought I had in my head was, well, this ain't good. And then I got the overwhelming feeling that I had entered a different universe. And it's easy to believe that, because shortly after my injury, our entire society just seemed to go batshit crazy. So I looked around and saw the group of spectators were still spectating, and I just in disbelief that no one was coming to help me. So I couldn't stand up, so I just crawled to the nearest vehicle about 30 yards away and climbed in there and sat there and watched the frenzy of activity involved in destroying the evidence of what had happened. Then I spotted the general manager sitting in another vehicle, smoking a cigarette and just giving me the most evil look I've ever seen coming from another human. I guess because everyone was just terrified of their own legal liability. No one came to check on me or talk to me, and I knew I had entry wounds on both hands and exit wounds on both feet. I looked at my poor hands, and both of them had been blown to the bone in places. My little finger looked like it was about to fall off. I knew I'd never play guitar again. I knew my life was never going to be the same again. There were many things I'd never do again. Hell, right then and there, I wasn't even sure I was going to live through what had happened to me. And if it hadn't been an electrical injury that cauterized all my wounds, I definitely would have bled to death before help could arrive, because that place is in the middle of nowhere. But help did arrive in the form of a lifeguard helicopter. And as they went to remove my boots, I told them it felt like my feet were melted, but my boots were pretty much undamaged, but they just concealed the melted mess inside. So I almost passed out when they pulled my sock off, and my flesh just kind of peeled out of there like a barbecue banana peel. Then they decided to give me some pain meds. So they laid me on a stretcher and began to cut off my clothes. And I looked up, and then I was surrounded by spectators. I guess they decided that they did need a closer look. I mean, the EMTs had to force them away. That day, I really got to witness some of the worst behaviors known to humankind. Then I saw faces of a local rancher friend and his grandson. They told me everything's going to be all right, and well, I sure hope they were right. So for the second time that day, I was whisked in the air and felt my stomach leaving me, although this second trip would be a little less divine than the first one. It would pretty much kidnap me into a new reality, a world of pain, 12 days in the burn ICU unit, 3 months in the hospital, 6 months wheelchair, a year off my feet, 25 plus operations, and in many ways, it's just the beginning of my story.